Hey everyone, it's Nido King back again for more grinding.
Which means that I'm here again, as always.
Yeah, we're going to learn about some of the interesting folks and the folklore of the Undersea City.
Yep. Starting with the big one, Brigantia. She's rather interesting, mythologically speaking. She was a Celtic goddess, round about, olden times, antiquity sort of era. She's sometimes associated with various figures from other sort of different mythologies. So, from like your Roman stuff, she's like the concept of Victoria, your Greek Nike, as it were, and she's also associated with such prominent figures as Saint Brigid, who you might be familiar with. She's kind of interesting in that regard. She essentially she's this high or elevated figure, which is essentially what her name is, and she crops up an awful lot throughout various places. She's one of those nice sort of important goddesses in Celtic and Irish in particular sort of religion, quote unquote, ish thing. The old sort of tradition. So it's kind of she's interesting. And she stretches way over even into like central middle Europe and stuff, continentally speaking, through France all the way over to Germany and beyond. It's kind of interesting how how big of a figure she was. Like even most other Celtic goddesses that you get over here in like Ireland and stuff don't carry over to the continent, but she was obviously such a universal figure. And I suppose that association with like victory and sort of war and stuff kind of is something that everyone has in common back then. So,
Yeah, it does seem kind of like when people find there's a god related to victory, everybody wants to worship that god.
Yeah, their god of victory is helping them. I mean, I want to get on that, like so.
And it's like, okay, so we got the god of bedknobs and broomsticks over here, and the god of wine and women over here, and then we got the god of victory. That's my god.
Yeah, I want to win. Sure, give me some of that, yeah. But anyway, so that's Brigantia for you. And on we go. You're fighting the Drakai on terrible creatures of myth. Let me tell you about them. So the Drakai are part of our favourite family of folks and folklore-based creatures. The water thing, water monster. They're sort of a weird hag that basically wants to lure in young women and occasionally children, but all water monsters have to have associations with luring in children. It doesn't really make sense for the Drakai, but anyway. Their whole thing is that they lure them in with the intent to have them nurse their young hag water things down at the bottom of whatever body of water they happen to be within. So basically the idea is when your young woman goes down to wash her clothes in the river, she might see something floating past, and it can be as innocuous as like a bowl, or as valuable as a piece of jewelry, or something of equal, merit back then. But the whole idea is that when she, is curious and interested in it and goes to pick it up, that's when she gets dragged down into the depths to nurse the Drakai's terrible young. And theoretically, she can then come back up and return, and there are stories about, women who have gone down and then come back up with the ability to see the Drakai, whereas, like many folklore-based things, are kind of invisible or whatever. But there's also sort of weird things that don't quite make sense about it. Like, for example, it can also happen if you, like, obviously when you go to pick it up, getting dragged down, yeah, you can see how that would happen. But there's also, stories of you pick it up, you sort of walk off with the object, and then when you're at home with the object in your house, the hag comes along in the middle of the night, opens up, the window and comes in to get you, which doesn't make as much sense, because then why did you even need to pick up the object? Who knows? It's a mystery.
Some kind of mystical tracking device, maybe?
Presumably. It's the only explanation. Well,
I assume the NSA would like to learn from these guys.
Well, yes. There's so much we can learn from ancient mythological water beasts.
Like how to get killed by Quasarilli.
Yes. That is possibly the most important lesson that we can learn.
I think I have to kill 5 of those things total.
Ugh.
It's kind of annoying.
Unpleasant. Which brings us to our next one. Shall I continue with some more water beasts? Would that be appropriate?
Well, I don't imagine there's a whole lot of non-water beasts here, so go ahead.
It is a bit difficult. You'd be surprised, though. I'm going to move on briefly to the short explanation of the Peg Powler, which you might remember from earlier in the chapter. The Peg Powler is yet another water hag, but it doesn't have such noble goals of pursuing a nursemaid for its babies. It just kind of wants to drag you down into the water and kill you. It's interesting, though, in that it's associated not with some general body of water, like most of these like water-dwelling mythological things are. You know, they're usually general to any body of water because they need to be movable depending on where you are. But the Peg Powler is very specific to one river, specifically the River Tees around Middleton in England. And it has different names depending on where it is. Like the Peg Powler is from, you know, that general Middleton area, but you also go to the likes of Teesdale and a bit further up from that. And it's there called the High Green Ghost. And others, you know, similar to, like, associating it with being a spirit or a ghost in that sort of sense of a dead person that kind of wants to drown you, rather than, like, some weird fairy. So it's kind of interesting in that it gets that kind of idea. And it's obviously the similar sort of idea that you get all throughout, like, these various mythological concepts, but the idea that it's intrinsically linked Nessie-style to a specific river is kind of weird.
Kind of reminds me of the Rusalka.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, an awful lot of old hags in rivers that want to drown you. It's oddly common. I don't know why people thought that hags tended to live in rivers, but apparently they did. That's just the way it is. It's a mystery. So anyway, meanwhile in the grinding video, more Drakai being slain with Quasarilis. It's really astounding.
Yeah, I finally got the job done, unlocked its karma, and then I forget whether it was at that point or later on. No, I think it's later on when I get to the halfway point I discover it needs some green dust to build up.
Ugh.
I'm like too short of being able to build up one of Quasarili's more important karmas, and then I kinda use up all the green dust.
Ugh. Ugh. Unpleasant. On the plus side, though, if I'm not mistaken, you are now fighting some Kushi.
I think I've just finished those for now, but I'll probably need to go back later on.
Well, we've seen them now, we're doomed to talk about them. It's just the way. So let me tell you about fairy dogs. You all remember the Catshi from back in the day, and its whole thing about don't let the Catshi near you when you're, you know, in your coffin and whatever, because it'll steal your soul, or such and such. But also maybe it's like a heroic figure? We're kind of confused. Anyway, so the Kushi, much less common over here. It's very much a Scottish thing, or Welsh thing. But its whole thing is, it's kind of like your psychopomp, your come along with me, I'm gonna bring you to the afterlife sort of thing. It's pretty damn big, like way bigger than Folklore seems to think. It's not a small, like, puppy-sized thing. It probably would have crushed Ellen by now, actually. But they also have strange things, like, for example, they have these weird mannish, like, huge hands and all kinds of weird things like that. They're also one of these things that specifically has a home. So, for example, you get a lot of these ideas of fairies and stuff being resident in barrows and other places of burial, and obviously your water spirits in various, like, bodies of water. The Kushi is interesting, however, because it inhabits, like, caves and crags and kind of weird notches in the sides of hills, which is interesting, and generally just sort of roams around being a bother. But it's not just, like, a person that brings you from your deathbed to wherever you go afterwards. It's also potentially capable of killing you, which is unpleasant. It's chiefly silent, but occasionally it, much like your Banshee's keening or your Dullahan getting to the top of a hill and declaring someone's name, it will occasionally bark, and if it does, you're kind of doomed. Because depending on the legend, if you hear these barks, it gives, if for example the legend says that it gives 3 barks, then if you you know, stick around in the middle of, you know, nowhere out at sea or in a field or wandering the bogs at night, and you don't get to somewhere safe by the time you hear the third one, you're going to, like, die. Probably of fear, also possibly falling into a bog or off your ship. It's unpleasant. Also, much like the Drakai and its desire to procure nursemaids that happen to like jewelry and wooden basins, the Kushi, for some reason, also tends to kidnap nursing women, so you have to lock them up if you hear it, because otherwise they'll steal them, and so that they can give milk to baby fairies. It's weird. Shrug. So there you have it.
Yeah, I think we should probably avoid drawing too much attention to that kind of story. Given recent events.
Yes. It's... you know. It's questionable. But, you know. What are you gonna do? I'm here to talk about old things. Let me tell you about old things.
Alright.
Speaking of old things, or rather, unfortunately not, you're fighting Fraxinus.
Indeed I am.
And Fraxinus is not a myth. I'm sorry. It's just a boring old plant. Specifically, it's the olive and lilac family of plants. So you might be familiar with it, rather, in the form of the ash tree. So there you go. That description about Fraxinus having to do with a tree, it's literally just a big ash tree. Congratulations. I'm sorry. Sorry to break this to you.
No, it's okay. You've consoled me from the loss of half of my green dusts on building up Drakai attack power when I'm not sure it even has attack power.
So sorry. 2 terrible blows, right, one after the other. How will you survive? On the other hand, you might survive by fighting Alraune? Because that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I gotta defeat 10 Alraune with Alraune.
Ah, wonderful. It's always great when a folk is just, you know, kill more of this folk, but with this folk. I probably should avoid saying this folk so much. It's starting to lose meaning. But, I could talk about the Alraune. I could tell you about it, but that would require us delving into slightly R-rated territory. And perhaps we want to wait till later in the video for that. The twilight hours of the video.
No, I don't want to think about R-rated and Twilight in the same sentence.
Oh, sorry. I didn't even think. Great. Well, let me tell you about our red light district of the video. So, you might be more aware of the Alraune by its English name, as Alraune is a German word. It is, rather, in English, the mandrake. So, I'm sure you're aware of it by now.
Yes, I'm kind of familiar.
So, mandrakes, in case you aren't familiar, as Nidoking is, are these terrible plants that are believed that when you unearth them from the ground, will kill you with their shrill and piercing screech. But there's a bit more to them than that. For example, do you know how the Alraune is formed? How the mandrake grows from the earth? No? Yes?
Something about cemeteries, like it grows on graves.
Well, you've been hearing some very PG stories, my friend. No, according to alchemists from the Middle Ages, they were formed when, well, you see. Let me explain. Alchemists of the Middle Ages believed that when you hanged someone, they were prone to, well, not a loosening of the bowels, but rather a loosening of other things. Suffice to say, there was the ground underneath hanged men tended to be sticky, according to alchemists. So, this was supposedly what caused the mandrake to grow. And the idea was that the reason that it was this weird human-shaped root thing was because it was, you know, literally the offspring of a dead person. Specifically an evil one. And witches could, like, use mandrakes to impregnate themselves, and then they would have like offspring that were weird homunculus things that didn't have any emotions or, you know, feelings or anything. So they were great for like golem work, I guess, if you wanted that sort of thing. It's kind of gross. But
Just want to know why Harry Potter didn't go into that level of detail.
I imagine because it would have been too boring. That's definitely the reason. But, yes.
Speaking of which, you might notice that I kill significantly fewer of each folk in this video than it says I should. I cut a lot of stuff out, just...
For the sake of our sanity? For the sake of your
Yeah.
sanity? Goodness knows you don't want to relive that again.
Well, mostly for the viewers, because nobody actually wants to see me fight 10 of these things even sped up.
But in our final note about the Mandrake, it is worth noting that even though all this sort of seminal work of these hanged men, as it were, is the general sort of thing, it can also be blood, so take solace in that. There are differences, but that's the basic story of the Mandrake. Also, don't pick up a Mandrake unless you have a dog. Always get a dog to uproot a Mandrake for you. So, there you go. And that's all I have to say about the Alraune. I'm sorry.
That's alright, I think that was plenty.
Although, we are now competing in a tug-of-war with, with a particularly stubborn Alraune.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish that one before I left the room, because I hate it so much.
I can well understand.
And now I gotta go kill 5 Azrai with it.
Oh joy. I will avoid repeating my previous diatribes on Azrai, but I will talk of the Hobbledy, which is about the place. Unfortunately for everyone, the Hobbledy is not a thing. Not even insofar as the likes of Fraxinus is a thing, because it really isn't a thing. It might be a weird corruption of a hobbledehoy, which is like sort of a weird, gangly, awkward young person. But other than that, it is probably nothing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to say, nothing interesting there. Giant fish, on the other hand, have a lot of interesting stuff that I can talk about. So, we'll get to those. I suppose I should start. Do you have a preference? Giant fish? Thoughts?
Nothing specific. I mean, we got Malabaricus right here, but I'll be coming back to fight it again at the end of the video.
Well, in that case, why don't we leave it for then? Because I do have other things that we should address. Let's talk about Acidia, shall we?
Alright.
The Acidia is interesting because if you remember its distant cousin, the agar-agar, which was nothing more than some pleasant bacteria, culture-friendly chemical stuff, the Acidia is really kind of similar. It's specifically a type of tunicate. It can be, but it is more specifically a word which refers to, if you're familiar with pitcher plants or similar sort of things.
Yeah, the carnivorous plants.
Exactly. It's and you know, they sort of attract the flies and they go down and they get stuck in all the honey and yada yada yada. Anyway, the point is that weird sort of shape of like a pitcher or a jug or other bottle or sort of thing shaped section of any kind of plant or animal, that is called an Acidia or an Acidium. So that's what that is. And also it is a type of tunicate, i.e. like a sponge or a polyp. So there you are. These are the mysteries that Acidia holds. They're not very interesting. They're not very many. But what are you going to do?
You know, when I invited you to be a guest, I didn't say, just give me the interesting stuff.
I'm sorry, but we are doomed to address everything, whether we like it or not.
We never, ever, ever have to use Warthog again.
That is the perfect consolation. The real question I have, though, is, will we have to use Coropoona again?
Actually, I'll be using it rather shortly. Once I'm done building up Alraune here, we'll be heading off to Warcadia to work on its first karma.
Wonderful. We can never get enough of Warcadia. Although I must admit I do actually like Warcadia's design quite a lot, so I don't really mind.
Yeah, I just wish they'd had a slightly better variety of folks there. I mean,
That is
the
the
folks
big
in this
deficit,
chapter
yeah.
cover almost every base, and then Warcadia, you've got basically 2 types of folks.
Yeah, and an awful lot of it is like you've got the guy Bolg and the guy, or not the guy Bolg, the guy Bui and the guy Jarrod, which are like similar, just different colors. So it's kind of a bit of that going on. And I suppose there's a bit of that here too with the Azrai and the Alraune, but it's not nearly so like obvious, I want to say. But that seems a bit mean.
Yeah. Well, Azrai and Anwen, at the very least, are 2 rather different character models.
Yes, exactly.
As opposed to, say, Drakai and Draruku, I'm not even sure they use different models at all.
I'm not sure they did. They do seem very similar.
Now I just gotta kill any 5 folks, and hey, there's a lot of folks right here.
I really do love when it is just any 5 folks, because it's so much simpler that way. So freeform.
And I can't remember what you need to do for the final karma. Probably something like kill a bunch of Spriggan. Almost every slash element eventually comes down to kill a bunch of Spriggan.
It's Spriggan all the way down, I'm afraid. But that's just the way it is sometimes, I suppose.
Oh no, it's green dust.
Oh.
Well, now I'm a bit farther from my green dust target.
Well, there just isn't enough green dust in the world, that's the problem. And of course, speaking of dust, we're in Warcadia at last. At long last we've returned. But I think now is the perfect time to talk about Coropoona, because, you know, why wouldn't I? So Coropoona is, as you can see in the game, it's a like volcanic-looking folk, fiery and rocky and stuff. But the actual basis for Coropoona is the specific volcano in Peru, which it's got some history behind it. It's a bit complicated. Some people have thought that it was the basis for this really important shrine back in the olden days of the Inca, but it's never really been proven, and there's never really been any evidence. It's sort of an El Dorado, Manawa, you know, Lemuria-esque sort of tale. Let's go hunt down the lost city of Vilcabamba and the shrine of Coropoona. It's not really going to happen, but it is a volcanic mountain, so you can see the reason that they chose it for Coropoona, the adorable volcanic thing that it is. It's a very interesting volcano, but unfortunately not particularly mythological beyond its potentially being a shrine. So that's the sad story of Coropoona. It's kind of meh-ishness. With that, we are left with, unfortunately, only one more folk that has any meaning and relevance to talk about. That is our Malabaricus. And I'm determined to sit on that until we're discussing it, so you can get the full scope of the description. How goes the blowing up of various Warcadians as we speak?
You don't have to blow up very many of them, but Coropoona doesn't do a whole lot of damage at this point.
I have noticed. I'm hoping the karmas would fix that.
That I don't know. For some reason, I was thinking there was a karma that actually made more of them attack at a time, but I'm probably thinking of a different folk that Keats gets.
It's unfortunate, because I think it would be really cool to have 1 million little Coropoonas running out there.
More like 3.
Well, 3, 1 million... What's the difference, really? About 999,997. But anyway, the point remains.
Well, let's see. So I gotta collect a whole bunch of golden ore now. Because Fraxinus, just like Ogma, depends on those to level up.
Well, they are somewhat similar. Both are tree things, tree-ish things.
And they're both slash element attacks.
Of course.
But since most of the folks in this area drop golden ore, it's kinda...
2 birds with 1 stone.
And of course, I have to do a lot of grinding on some of the worst folks.
Wonderful.
I included subtitles to remind everybody of how many of these things I have to kill to get the materials I need.
It's always way more than it should be, I feel, but isn't that always the way in games?
Yeah, we'll get into that a lot more near the end of the video.
I look forward to it? Not really. I can't even lie.
Well, we'll be seeing some very amusing numbers. If you've never encountered a math-based joke before,
I don't believe I have.
you'll see how hilarious numbers can be.
I might be familiar with the hilarity of numbers. I won't deny that's a possibility. Goodness, that's a lot of spearmen.
Yeah, at this point, I decided to leave the adventure in this room in just because I finally found a way, just purely by accident, to break those purple crystals up there that have been bugging me this whole time.
Ah, with a certain smashy hook, is he?
Actually, no. I was using the Destroy element folks for a while, and then I decided to go for Thunder on the Patriot, and whoop, there you go.
Welp.
I smash the crystals, and I get another freaking yellow stone.
Wonderful.
And nothing.
Random drops, aren't they lovely? I will say I did like how it slowly floated down. It seemed so peaceful.
And the worst part of it is, those crystals never respawn.
Oh dear.
At least, not as far as I can tell. Maybe once I leave this room, or, once I leave the realm and come back, they might respawn. But as long as I stayed here, there's no more drops.
Well, that's just great.
My reward for building up Gaboy, coming all the way back here, 1 yellow stone.
Sigh. 11, really?
Yeah.
Oh, not even including the 7. Oh, good lord.
Yeah, ones I killed just because I was looking for golden ore. That's how I counted.
Well,
I did this same sort of thing when I came over for Gargantua, because I need to defeat one of those with Coropoona, and I also need to get 2 more green quartz. I think this is the only folk that's accessible right now that drops it.
I can't imagine.
There might be another one in Chapter 4 that's even more of a pain to fight.
They really don't want you getting those. Also, I can't see fighting Gargantua with Coropoona being anything other than very, very long and painful.
Well, it does have a slight advantage in that a lot of times it'll slip right under the machine gun fire.
That is a good point. I can see that like being useful for actually getting your attacks through.
So eventually, while I was fighting the number of Gargantua that I need to, I sort of discovered an interesting pattern using Gaboy, then hitting with Coropoona during the small break between combos, and then just switching back and forth. That seemed to work really well.
Efficiency in folk grinding.
Yeah, it only took me half an hour to get the 2 green quartz that I needed.
You say that as though that isn't still a very long time for a handful of green quartz.
Ah, got to defeat Spriggan with Coropoona.
I told you, Spriggan all the way down. Everything comes back to Spriggan.
I remember very little about Spriggan. It's a really useful folk, but not all that much fun to fight.
No. Not especially memorable either. But that might just be me.
And there's my first green quartz.
First.
Yeah, I kept just the highlights from the entire half hour.
Well, at least you got them in the end?
I was singularly determined.
And you ranked up? Yeah, everything's coming up rosy.
Not in this fight, it's not.
Oh, okay, not so much.
Just about this entire fight is pretty hilarious.
Nothing but explosions. I can't see anything but endless explosions.
Yeah, I think this is where I legitimately thought that if I tried to finish destroying it, that it would probably kill me, so I just captured it.
I can't say, blame you.
I think capturing doesn't have any effect on the likelihood of getting the drops.
I wouldn't imagine so. It would be a bit too strange to try and work that out, even if it was.
I really had no interest in grinding for the 15 additional that I would need for one of Quasarelli's karmas.
We have returned.
Yeah, it's a quick run through the fairy realm. Just wanted to capture a bunch of impets and brownies, and make them almost useful by being able to set more than one trap at a time. The problem is I keep accidentally killing them with Malabaricus.
Malabaricus does have a tendency to just devour everything in its path. Well, sometimes.
So at some point I get wise and just switch back to Henky for its attack,
Good old Henky.
which I know will take them down without killing them.
It's just the same room.
Yeah, when all your folks reach the point where they're just too powerful to get done the specific job that you need them for.
Ah, yes, the endless, over-leveled doom that has befallen you. On the plus side, I mean, there's not much left.
Yeah, we are almost finished.
But we do have one final folk to discuss.
Yep, and we'll get to that as soon as I've finished grinding for all the green dust that I need. Needed 20, and I had 18 at one point, I got 2 more along the way, and then I used 15, so this is the end of me grinding for 15 green dust.
Thank goodness. You're joking me.
Nope.
That's
At least there are 12 of them in this room almost every time you enter.
true.
I just sort of let a couple of Quasarelli loose and start whacking everything inside with Puka until the job is done.
Well, at least it was easy, if not expedient.
Yep, and here we are at the end, returning to a realm for the first time during any grinding video.
I know. For the wonderful Malabaricus. Malabaricus, speaking of, is potentially 2 things, but one is pretty obvious. The first one, which is not really anything to do with it, but I think it's just interesting, is that there is a book called the Hortus Malabaricus, which is specifically a horticultural guide dealing with specific plants, particularly medicinal ones, that you might encounter in Kerala, India, which is just kind of interesting. It's a pretty old textbook. Not very old, but pretty old. You know, sort of 17th century, thereabouts. It's just kind of interesting. Nothing to do with the giant fish monster, though. What does is the Malabaricus fish. Specifically, you might know it as the wolf fish, the famous predatory South American freshwater fish. It's pretty big and eaty. I mean, big for a certain value. Big, I mean, obviously there's bigger fishes. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a big fish. And it has lots of sharp teeth and is kind of creepy looking. Much like actual Malabaricus. The folk, that is. It's not a pleasant fish to look at, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to get eaten by it. But it looks like it's got a mouthful of baby fish, so I'm not sure how much eating it could really do.
True. It is interesting, though, that the actual wolffish are a bit like that, in the sense that although they aren't one of the fish that keep all their babies in their mouths, like the Arowana, I think, was one. It does have an interesting thing where they spawn in like very shallow water areas, and then the males guard the nests and keep the little baby fishes safe, even after they've hatched their little eggs, which is unusual for fish. So it's kind of interesting. They're also kind of terrifying, but that's just me. And that's it.
Yep, so see you next time for Brigantia.